Genesis chapter 9 verse 1. And God blessed Noah and his sons, and said unto them, Be fruitful, and multiply, and replenish the earth. Context: Genesis chapter 9 verse 1 occurs immediately after the global flood, during the time when Noah and his family have emerged from the ark. In Genesis 6-8, we learn about God's judgment upon the earth due to its wickedness and the instructions he gave Noah to build the ark to save himself, his family, and representative animals. Blessing from God. After the floodwaters recede, God blesses Noah and his sons. This blessing represents God's favor, provision, and multiplication upon them. Despite the judgment of the flood, God's faithfulness endures, and he continues to show his love for humanity through his blessings. Be fruitful and multiply. God's first command to Noah and his sons is to be fruitful and multiply. This echoes the original command God gave to Adam and Eve in Genesis chapter 1 verse 28. It is a call to procreate and fill the earth with their descendants, ensuring the continuity of humanity. This command has both a physical and spiritual dimension. Physically, it refers to the propagation of the human race, ensuring its survival and growth. Spiritually, it implies the responsibility to pass on their faith in God and His covenant promises to future generations. Replenish the earth. God instructs Noah and his sons to replenish the earth. The term replenish in the KJV is often misunderstood to mean filling the earth again, implying that the earth was previously populated before the flood. However, the Hebrew word used here, mala, is better translated as fill or populate. Thus, God is instructing them to fill the earth with their descendants, as the human population was drastically reduced due to the flood. Significance: Genesis chapter 9 verse 1 demonstrates God's faithfulness, even in the face of judgment. It signifies a fresh start for humanity after the flood, with Noah and his family serving as the new beginning. This verse emphasizes God's desire for the continuation of humanity, both physically and spiritually. Additionally, this command to be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth points to the importance of family, the sanctity of marriage, and the responsibility of passing on godly values to future generations. In conclusion, Genesis chapter 9 verse 1 captures God's blessing upon Noah and his sons after the flood. It reveals God's faithfulness, His command to multiply, and His desire for humanity to fill the earth. This verse reminds us of the importance of family and our responsibility to pass on our faith to future generations. Genesis chapter 9 verse 2. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every fowl of the air, upon all that moveth upon the earth, and upon all the fishes of the sea. Into your hand are they delivered. Context: Genesis chapter 9 verse 2 comes immediately after the account of Noah and the flood. God had destroyed all living creatures on the earth, except for Noah, his family, and the animals that were saved in the ark. After the floodwaters receded and Noah and his family left the ark, God made a covenant with Noah, Genesis chapter 9 verses 8-17, and gave them instructions for their new life on earth. Fear and dread. In this verse, God declares that the fear and dread of humans will be upon every living creature on earth. This statement suggests a change in the relationship between humans and animals post-flood. Prior to the flood, humans were given dominion over the animals, Genesis chapter 1 verse 28. However, now there is a heightened sense of fear and respect from the animals towards humans. This fear is likely a protective instinct given by God to preserve the lives of humans and maintain order on earth. Dominion and responsibility. While the verse speaks of the fear of humans being upon all creatures, it also emphasizes that the animals are delivered into human hands. This statement reaffirms the dominion or authority given to humans over the animal kingdom. As stewards of God's creation, humans are entrusted with the responsibility to care for and manage the earth and its creatures. This responsibility includes treating animals with respect and ensuring their well-being. Implications. Genesis chapter 9 verse 2 serves as a reminder of the unique position humans hold in the created order. It highlights the interdependence between humans and animals, where both are part of God's intricate design. While humans exercise authority over animals, it should be done with a sense of reverence and care, acknowledging God's ownership and love for all creation. Application. As we reflect on Genesis chapter 9 verse 2, we can draw several lessons for our lives today. Firstly, we should recognize the significance of our role as stewards of the earth and its creatures. This implies treating animals with compassion, avoiding cruelty, and taking measures to protect endangered species. Secondly, we should exercise our authority responsibly, using it to preserve the harmony and balance of the natural world. Lastly, this verse can prompt us to reflect on our relationship with God, acknowledging His sovereignty and recognizing the value He places on all living beings. In summary, Genesis chapter 9 verse 2 reminds us of the fear and respect that animals have towards humans, while also emphasizing our responsibility as stewards over God's creation. It encourages us to exercise our authority with care and compassion, honoring the intricate balance of the natural world. Genesis chapter 9 verse 3. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you. Even as the green herb have I given you all things. Context and background. Genesis chapter 9 verse 3 is part of the account of Noah and the flood. After the floodwaters receded and Noah and his family left the ark, God made a covenant with Noah and his descendants. This verse specifically addresses the provision of food for humans and expands on the previous dietary restrictions given in Genesis chapter 1 verses 29 to 30. Permission to eat animals. In this verse, God grants permission to Noah and his family to eat the flesh of animals. Before the flood, it seems that humans were only permitted to eat plants, Genesis chapter 1 verse 29. However, after the flood, God extends the range of human diet to include the consumption of animals. This is an important transition in dietary instructions for humanity. Stewardship and dominion. The verse emphasizes the authority and dominion God has given to humans over the animal kingdom. God's original command to Adam and Eve in Genesis chapter 1 verses 26 to 28 was to have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and every living thing that moves on the earth. With this expanded permission to eat meat, humans are given greater responsibility and authority over creation. Responsibility and gratitude. While humans are given the freedom to eat meat, it is important to recognize the responsibility that comes with it. In later parts of the Bible, such as Leviticus and Deuteronomy, dietary restrictions and guidelines are provided to guide the Israelites in their eating habits. These guidelines promote responsible and respectful consumption, highlighting the sanctity of life and the importance of stewardship. Balance and moderation. Although humans are allowed to eat meat, it is crucial to exercise balance and moderation. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10 verse 31, the Apostle Paul instructs believers to do all things to the glory of God. This principle applies to our eating habits as well. Christians are encouraged to consider the impact of their dietary choices on their health, the environment, and the welfare of animals. Symbolism and foreshadowing. This verse can also be seen as a foreshadowing of the coming of Jesus Christ. In the New Testament, Jesus is often referred to as the Lamb of God, John chapter 1 verse 29, and is associated with the Passover lamb, 1 Corinthians chapter 5 verse 7. The permission to eat meat in Genesis chapter 9 verse 3 anticipates the sacrificial system and the ultimate sacrifice of Jesus as the atonement for the sins of humanity. In conclusion, Genesis chapter 9 verse 3 marks a significant shift in dietary instructions, allowing humans to eat meat while emphasizing responsible stewardship. This verse carries broader implications for understanding our relationship with God's creation, our responsibility as stewards, and the anticipation of Jesus' sacrifice. Genesis chapter 9 verse 4. Verse. But flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall ye not eat. Genesis chapter 9 verse 4, KJV, context. Genesis chapter 9 verse 4 is part of the narrative following the global flood, in which Noah and his family were saved in the ark along with various animals. After the floodwaters receded, God made a covenant with Noah and his descendants, establishing certain laws and instructions. Respect for life. This verse emphasizes the sacredness of life and the prohibition against consuming blood. God instructs Noah and his family not to eat flesh with its lifeblood. This instruction reflects God's regard for the value of life, as blood represents life. By abstaining from consuming blood, humans are called to show reverence and respect for the life God has given. Symbolism of blood. In the Bible, blood is often associated with atonement and the offering of sacrifices. Blood represents the life force and is viewed as holy. In Leviticus chapter 17 verse 11, God declares, "For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that makes atonement for the soul." This concept is later fulfilled in the sacrificial death of Jesus Christ, whose blood was shed for the forgiveness of sins. Dietary restrictions. The prohibition against consuming blood extends beyond the time of Noah and is reiterated in the Mosaic Law. In Leviticus chapter 17 verses 10 to 14, God gives specific instructions to the Israelites regarding the consumption of blood, emphasizing its significance. This command was intended to set apart the Israelites as a holy nation and to teach them about the sanctity of life. Application today. Although the Mosaic Law has been fulfilled in Christ, and Christians are not bound by its dietary regulations, Acts chapter 10 verses 9 to 16, the principle behind the command in Genesis chapter 9 verse 4 still holds value. It reminds believers of the importance of treating life with reverence and respect, both in human interactions and in the way we view the natural world. Additionally, this verse can serve as a reminder of the atoning sacrifice of Jesus Christ, whose blood was shed for the redemption of humanity. Symbolic meaning. Beyond the literal interpretation, some biblical scholars interpret the command in Genesis chapter 9 verse 4 symbolically. They suggest that the prohibition against consuming blood represents a restriction on engaging in practices associated with pagan rituals, which often involved consuming blood as part of their ceremonies. This interpretation highlights the need for God's people to separate themselves from idolatrous practices and remain faithful to the one true God. In conclusion, Genesis chapter 9 verse 4 emphasizes the sacredness of life and the prohibition against consuming blood. It underscores the value God places on life and serves as a reminder of the atoning sacrifice of Jesus Christ. Christians can apply this principle by treating life with reverence, separating themselves from idolatrous practices, and embracing the redemption offered through Christ's shed blood. Genesis chapter 9 verse 5. "And surely your blood of your lives will I require. At the hand of every beast will I require it, and at the hand of man. At the hand of every man's brother will I require the life of man." Context. Genesis chapter 9 verse 5 is part of the narrative of Noah and the aftermath of the Great Flood. After the floodwaters receded and Noah and his family left the ark, God made a covenant with Noah and his descendants. This verse occurs within the context of God establishing a new order and providing guidelines for human conduct. Analysis. Sanctity of human life. The verse emphasizes the sanctity and value of human life. God states that He will hold both animals and humans accountable for taking the life of a fellow human being. This declaration indicates that God sees human life as significant and worthy of protection. Divine retribution. The verse speaks of divine retribution for the shedding of blood. God states that He will require an accounting for the lives of both humans and animals. This highlights God's role as the ultimate judge, ensuring justice for the taking of innocent life. Responsibility of humans. God holds humans accountable for their actions. The phrase, "At the hand of every man's brother will I require the life of man," suggests that if a person takes the life of another, they will face the consequences, possibly at the hands of another human being acting on behalf of God's justice. Animal responsibility. The verse also mentions the accountability of animals. While it may be interpreted metaphorically, it suggests that animals, too, will face divine retribution if they cause harm or take human life. This highlights the responsibility of all creatures to exist in harmony with one another. Application. Value of human life. As believers, we are reminded of the inherent value and sanctity of human life. This verse encourages us to recognize and respect the lives of others, treating them with dignity and love. Avoiding violence. This verse underscores the importance of avoiding violence and refraining from taking the life of another human being. It reminds us that God is the ultimate judge, and we should entrust justice to Him. Accountability and responsibility. The verse emphasizes personal accountability for our actions. It serves as a reminder that we will be held responsible for the choices we make and the impact they have on others. We should strive to live righteously and respect the lives of those around us. Living in harmony. The verse suggests that all creatures, including humans and animals, have a responsibility to exist in harmony. As stewards of God's creation, we should strive to maintain a harmonious relationship with both our fellow human beings and the natural world. In summary, Genesis chapter 9 verse 5 highlights the sanctity of human life, God's role as the ultimate judge, and the accountability and responsibility of both humans and animals. It calls us to value human life, avoid violence, embrace accountability, and live in harmony with one another and God's creation. Genesis chapter 9 verse 6. Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God made he man. Genesis chapter 9 verse 6 is a significant verse that occurs shortly after the story of Noah and the flood. This verse is part of God's covenant with Noah and his descendants, which establishes some foundational principles for human society and the sanctity of life. Preservation of human life. The verse begins by addressing the shedding of human blood. It emphasizes the seriousness and gravity of taking someone's life. In the biblical context, human life is considered sacred and valuable because humanity is created in the image of God. By affirming the sanctity of human life, this verse lays the foundation for the moral framework that values and protects the dignity and worth of every individual. Punishment for murder. The verse then establishes the principle of retribution or punishment for those who shed human blood. It states that, by man shall his blood be shed. This implies that if someone takes the life of another human being, they deserve to have their own life taken as a consequence. This principle of retribution serves as a deterrent to prevent the taking of innocent lives and to maintain order and justice within society. Image of God. The verse concludes by reiterating the idea that humans are made in the image of God. This phrase emphasizes the inherent worth, dignity, and uniqueness of every individual. Being made in God's image means that humans possess qualities such as reason, morality, and spirituality that distinguish them from the rest of creation. It also implies that humans have a special relationship and responsibility toward God and their fellow human beings. It's important to note that this verse addresses the crime of murder specifically and does not give individuals the authority to take matters of justice into their own hands. The principle of retribution outlined in Genesis chapter 9 verse 6 should be understood within the context of a just legal system, where governing authorities have the responsibility to administer justice. Overall, Genesis chapter 9 verse 6 establishes the sanctity of human life, the seriousness of taking another person's life, and the need for a just system of punishment. It highlights the responsibility of individuals and societies to uphold the value of human life and seek justice when it is violated. Genesis chapter 9 verse 7. And you, be ye fruitful, and multiply. Bring forth abundantly in the earth, and multiply therein. Context. Genesis chapter 9 verse 7 is part of the story of Noah and his family after the Great Flood. God had just made a covenant with Noah, promising to never again destroy all flesh with a flood. In this verse, God commands Noah and his family to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. The blessing of fruitfulness, God's command to be fruitful and multiply, is a continuation of the original blessing He pronounced upon humanity in Genesis chapter 1 verse 28. It reflects God's desire for human beings to procreate and populate the earth. This command acknowledges the importance of family and the continuation of life. responsibility and stewardship. Along with the command to multiply, God also emphasizes the responsibility to bring forth abundantly in the earth. This implies that humanity has a role in cultivating and caring for the earth. It highlights our stewardship over creation and the need to use its resources wisely and responsibly. The value of life. The command to be fruitful and multiply affirms the value of human life. It recognizes the significance of each individual and the importance of the continuation of the human race. God's plan for humanity involves growth, expansion, and the preservation of life. God's covenant. Genesis chapter 9 verse 7 is a part of the covenant God establishes with Noah and all living creatures. This covenant is a promise of God's faithfulness and mercy towards humanity. The command to multiply is a crucial aspect of this covenant, as it ensures the survival and future of humanity. Application. As believers, we can draw several lessons from Genesis chapter 9 verse 7. Firstly, we should value and cherish the sanctity of life, recognizing that every person is created in the image of God. Secondly, we should embrace the responsibility of stewardship over the earth, taking care of the environment and its resources. Finally, we should honor and uphold the institution of the family, understanding its role in God's plan for humanity. In conclusion, Genesis chapter 9 verse 7 reminds us of God's command to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. It highlights the value of life, our responsibility as stewards, and the significance of family. By understanding and applying these principles, we can live out God's intended purpose for humanity. Genesis chapter 9 verse 8. And God spake unto Noah, and to his sons with him, saying. This verse serves as an introduction to the instructions and covenant that God establishes with Noah and his descendants after the flood. Let's explore the context and significance of this verse within the broader narrative. In the preceding verses, we learn about how Noah and his family, along with the animals, were saved from the devastating flood through the ark that Noah had built according to God's instructions. Once the floodwaters recede and they exit the ark, Noah offers a burnt sacrifice to God, which pleases him. Genesis chapter 8 verses 20 to 21. In response to Noah's offering, God establishes a covenant with him and his descendants, symbolized by a rainbow in the sky. Genesis chapter 9 verses 12 to 17. The covenant contains several important elements that are conveyed in subsequent verses, including promises, commandments, and blessings. Genesis chapter 9 verse 8 acts as a prelude to these covenantal instructions, signifying that God specifically spoke to Noah and his sons. This verse sets the stage for the content that follows, emphasizing the divine authority and direct communication between God and humanity. The covenant established in this chapter highlights several key aspects. Preservation of humanity. God promises never to destroy all life on earth with a flood again. Genesis chapter 9 verse 11. This assurance provides a sense of security and establishes a new relationship between God and humanity. Prohibition against murder. God commands that human life should be respected and protected. He institutes the principle of capital punishment for those who shed human blood, declaring that, "Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed." Genesis chapter 9 verse 6. This commandment reinforces the sanctity and value of human life. Fruitfulness and multiplication. God reiterates his original command to be fruitful and multiply, urging Noah and his sons to increase in number and populate the earth. Genesis chapter 9 verse 1. This echoes the mandate given to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Genesis chapter 1 verse 28. Dominion over animals. God affirms humanity's dominion over the animals, permitting the consumption of animal flesh for sustenance. Genesis chapter 9 verses 2 to 3. However, God forbids the consumption of blood, emphasizing the sanctity of life. Genesis chapter 9 verse 4. Through the establishment of this covenant, God demonstrates his mercy, faithfulness, and commitment to the well-being of humanity. The covenant serves as a basis for the relationships between God, Noah, and subsequent generations. Genesis chapter 9 verse 8 although brief, serves as a pivotal verse that sets the stage for the covenant and highlights the direct communication between God and Noah, reinforcing the significance of this divine interaction. By studying the surrounding verses and comprehending the depth of God's covenant with Noah, we can gain insights into God's character, His desire for relationship with humanity, and His enduring promises. Genesis chapter 9 verse 9. And I, behold, I establish my covenant with you, and with your seed after you. This verse is part of the narrative after the Great Flood, where God made a covenant with Noah and his descendants. To understand the significance of this verse, let's delve into the context and explore its broader implications. After the wickedness and corruption of humanity had reached its peak, God decided to bring judgment upon the earth through a global flood. However, Noah found favor in the eyes of God because of his righteousness and obedience. God commanded Noah to build an ark and bring his family, along with pairs of every living creature, into the ark to preserve them during the flood. Genesis chapter 9 verse 9 marks a pivotal moment in the aftermath of the flood. It highlights God's faithfulness and His desire to establish a covenant, a solemn agreement, with Noah and his descendants. This covenant signifies God's commitment to humanity, despite the wickedness that led to the devastating flood. Here are a few key points to consider regarding Genesis chapter 9 verse 9. Covenant. A covenant is a sacred agreement between two parties, often initiated by a superior party. In this case, God establishes the covenant with Noah and his seed, which refers to his descendants. This covenant sets the foundation for God's relationship with humanity after the flood. God's initiative. Notice that it is God who takes the initiative to establish the covenant. It demonstrates His grace and willingness to engage with humanity, even after the judgment of the flood. This highlights God's desire for a relationship with His creation, despite their shortcomings. Perpetuity. The covenant is not only established with Noah, but also with his seed, indicating that it extends beyond his immediate generation. It suggests that this covenant will be an enduring agreement between God and humanity throughout successive generations. Faithfulness. God's commitment to the covenant reveals His faithfulness. Despite humanity's inherent tendency towards sin, God pledges His faithfulness to Noah and his descendants. This covenant serves as a reminder of God's unwavering love and mercy towards His people. The covenant with Noah ultimately finds its fulfillment in subsequent biblical covenants, such as the covenant with Abraham and ultimately the new covenant in Jesus Christ. It demonstrates God's redemptive plan for humanity, culminating in the salvation provided through Jesus. Genesis chapter 9 verse 9, therefore, holds great significance as it marks the establishment of a covenant between God and Noah, emphasizing God's faithfulness and His desire for an ongoing relationship with humanity. It serves as a testament to God's grace and His promise to preserve and bless Noah's descendants throughout the generations to come. Genesis chapter 9 verse 10. And with every living creature that is with you, of the fowl, of the cattle, and of every beast of the earth with you, from all that go out of the ark, to every beast of the earth. This verse is part of the narrative of Noah and the flood, specifically after the floodwaters had receded and Noah, his family, and the animals aboard the ark came out onto the dry ground. Let's delve into the broader context and explore the significance of Genesis chapter 9 verse 10. In Genesis 6-8, we read about how the wickedness of humanity had become great upon the earth, leading God to decide to bring a flood to cleanse the earth. However, Noah found favor in God's eyes as a righteous man and was instructed to build an ark to save himself, his family, and representatives of every kind of animal. After the floodwaters had subsided and Noah and his family left the ark, God made a covenant with Noah and all living creatures. In Genesis chapter 9 verses 8-17, we find the details of this covenant. Genesis chapter 9 verse 10 is part of God's instructions to Noah regarding this covenant. The verse emphasizes the comprehensive scope of the covenant, stating that it extends to every living creature that came out of the ark. This includes the birds of the air, the livestock, and every beast of the earth. God establishes a covenant not only with Noah and his descendants but also with all the creatures that survived the flood. The covenant that God establishes with Noah in this passage is significant in several ways. Preservation of life. God promises never to destroy the earth again with a flood and guarantees the continuity of life. This assurance of preservation offers hope and security to Noah and his descendants. Responsibility. Along with this promise, God entrusts Noah and his descendants with the responsibility to steward and care for the earth and its creatures. The covenant signifies a partnership between humanity and creation, emphasizing our role as caretakers and custodians of God's creation. Symbol of the covenant. As a sign of this covenant, God establishes the rainbow, stating that whenever it appears in the sky, it will remind him of his promise to never flood the earth again. The rainbow serves as a visible reminder of God's faithfulness and mercy. Universal nature. The covenant extends to all living creatures, emphasizing God's concern for his entire creation. It demonstrates his love and care for every creature, highlighting the value and significance of all life in God's eyes. Genesis 9:10, in its immediate context, highlights the inclusiveness of God's covenant with Noah and all living creatures. It reminds us of God's faithfulness, his care for his creation, and the responsibility he has entrusted to humanity. The verse invites us to reflect on our role as stewards of the earth, reminding us of our duty to preserve and protect the natural world. Genesis chapter 9 verse 11. And I will establish my covenant with you, neither shall all flesh be cut off any more by the waters of a flood, neither shall there any more be a flood to destroy the earth. This verse is a part of the narrative of Noah and the Great Flood, which is found in the book of Genesis. After the floodwaters receded, God made a covenant or a promise with Noah and his descendants. Let's explore the significance and implications of Genesis chapter 9 verse 11 in the context of this story. Covenant with Noah. God initiated a covenant with Noah, symbolizing his commitment to humanity. This covenant served as a binding agreement, promising that God would never again destroy all living creatures by a flood. It was a covenant of mercy and preservation. Assurance of safety. The verse assures that the earth will not be destroyed by a flood in the future. This promise provided Noah and his descendants with a sense of security and peace. It demonstrates God's faithfulness in keeping his word and fulfilling his promises. God's sovereignty over creation. The verse acknowledges God's sovereignty over creation. It reveals that God has the power to determine the fate of the earth and its inhabitants. By promising to withhold further destruction by a flood, God shows his authority and control over the natural elements. The preservation of life. Through this verse, God emphasizes the sanctity and value of life. He promises to preserve the lives of all creatures and emphasizes his desire for the continuation and flourishing of life on earth. A reminder of God's grace. Genesis chapter 9 verse 11 serves as a reminder of God's grace and mercy towards humanity. Despite humanity's disobedience and the wickedness that led to the flood, God chose to show compassion and offer a new beginning to Noah and his family. This covenant signifies God's willingness to extend grace even in the face of human failures. Overall, Genesis chapter 9 verse 11 highlights the covenant God established with Noah, assuring the safety of all living creatures and emphasizing God's sovereignty, preservation, and grace. It serves as a reminder of God's faithfulness and his desire for the well-being of his creation. Genesis chapter 9 verse 12. And God said, "This is the token of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you, for perpetual generations." Genesis chapter 9 verse 12 is part of the narrative of Noah and the aftermath of the Great Flood. In this verse, God establishes a covenant with Noah and all living creatures as a sign of his promise. The context of Genesis chapter 9 verse 12 begins with the story of Noah, who found favor in the eyes of God amidst the wickedness and corruption of humanity. God decided to bring a flood upon the earth to cleanse it from the sin that had pervaded it, sparing only Noah, his family, and a selection of animals, which were to be preserved on the ark. After the floodwaters receded, Noah and his family, along with the animals, left the ark. Noah built an altar and offered burnt offerings to God as an act of worship and thanksgiving. God was pleased with Noah's offering and made a covenant with him, which is described in Genesis chapter 9 verses 8 to 17. In this covenant, God promises never to destroy all flesh with a flood again. He establishes a sign or token of this covenant, which is a rainbow. The rainbow serves as a reminder of God's promise, both to humanity and to himself. It symbolizes God's faithfulness, mercy, and the enduring covenant he has made. Genesis chapter 9 verse 12 specifically emphasizes that the covenant is not only between God and Noah, but also between God and every living creature. This signifies that God's covenant extends to all of creation, including animals. It highlights the broad scope and inclusiveness of God's promise, ensuring the preservation and sustenance of life. The significance of this covenant reaches beyond Noah's time and applies to future generations. God states that this covenant is for perpetual generations, meaning it is everlasting and will continue throughout all time. Genesis chapter 9 verse 12 teaches us several important lessons. Firstly, it reveals God's faithfulness in keeping his promises. Despite humanity's propensity for sin and disobedience, God extends his grace and establishes a covenant that guarantees his enduring mercy. Secondly, the rainbow serves as a visual reminder of God's faithfulness, a symbol of hope and assurance that he will keep his word. Finally, this verse demonstrates God's concern for all of creation, highlighting his care and love for every living being. In summary, Genesis chapter 9 verse 12 is a significant verse that marks the establishment of God's covenant with Noah and all living creatures. It underscores God's faithfulness, the enduring nature of his promises, and his love for his creation. The rainbow serves as a token of this covenant, reminding us of God's mercy and the assurance that he will never again destroy the earth with a flood. Genesis chapter 9 verse 13. I do set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a token of a covenant between me and the earth. This verse is part of the narrative of Noah and the great flood, which is described in Genesis chapters 6 to 9. After the floodwaters receded and Noah, his family, and the animals left the ark, God made a covenant with Noah. The rainbow serves as a sign or token of this covenant, symbolizing God's promise never to destroy the earth again by a flood. Here are some key points and insights we can gather from this verse. Covenant with Noah. A covenant is a binding agreement between two parties, and in this case, it is between God and Noah. The covenant establishes a new relationship between God and humanity after the catastrophic flood. This covenant demonstrates God's faithfulness and mercy toward his creation. The rainbow. God sets his bow, referring to a rainbow, in the clouds as a visible sign of his covenant. It is important to note that the rainbow is not merely a natural phenomenon but is imbued with symbolic meaning in this context. It serves as a reminder of God's promise to Noah and subsequent generations. Preservation of the earth. The covenant emphasizes God's commitment to preserve the earth and its inhabitants. While the flood was a devastating judgment on the wickedness of humanity, God promises that such destruction will not occur again in the same manner. The rainbow's presence reminds us of this promise and provides comfort and assurance. God's faithfulness. The rainbow as a symbol of God's covenant illustrates his faithfulness and steadfastness. It serves as a constant reminder that God keeps his promises. Despite humanity's shortcomings and continued sinfulness, God remains faithful to his word and displays his grace and love through this covenant. Universal application. The covenant is between God and the earth, signifying its universal application. It extends to all living creatures and the entire planet. This inclusiveness highlights God's concern for his entire creation and affirms that his promises apply to all people, irrespective of nationality or ethnicity. The significance of Genesis chapter 9 verse 13 lies not only in its historical context but also in its theological implications. It reminds us of God's faithfulness, his commitment to preserve his creation, and the universal scope of his promises. The rainbow serves as a beautiful and enduring symbol of these profound truths. Genesis chapter 9 verse 14. And it shall come to pass, when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the bow shall be seen in the cloud. This verse is part of the narrative of Noah and the flood. After the floodwaters receded, God made a covenant with Noah and his descendants. In Genesis chapter 9 verses 8 to 17, God establishes a promise, symbolized by the rainbow, that he will never again destroy the earth with a flood. In verse 14 specifically, God explains that when he brings a cloud over the earth, the bow, rainbow, will be seen in the cloud. This verse emphasizes the cause and effect relationship between the cloud and the appearance of the rainbow. It highlights the natural phenomenon of a rainbow being formed in the sky when sunlight is refracted, reflected, and dispersed by water droplets in the air after rain. Symbolically, the rainbow represents God's faithfulness, mercy, and his covenant with humanity. It serves as a reminder of God's promise to never again destroy the earth with a flood. The presence of the rainbow in the sky is a visual sign of God's enduring love, protection, and grace towards his creation. This verse also reveals God's desire for humanity to have a tangible reminder of his covenant. Whenever people witness a rainbow, it can serve as a reassurance of God's faithfulness and his commitment to his promises. It demonstrates God's intention to communicate with his creation through the natural world and to provide a sign of hope and assurance. In summary, Genesis chapter 9 verse 14 highlights the appearance of the rainbow in a cloud as a sign of God's covenant with humanity. It signifies God's promise to never again destroy the earth with a flood and serves as a reminder of his faithfulness and love towards his creation. Genesis chapter 9 verse 15. And I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the waters shall no more become a flood to destroy all flesh. This verse is part of the narrative of Noah and the Great Flood. It occurs immediately after God made a covenant with Noah and his descendants, promising never to destroy all flesh with a flood again. The rainbow is given as a sign of this covenant, serving as a reminder of God's faithfulness and mercy. Here are a few key points to consider in a Bible study on Genesis chapter 9 verse 15. God's covenant. The verse emphasizes God's commitment to remembering and upholding his covenant. It demonstrates the faithfulness and trustworthiness of God, who establishes a covenant not only with Noah and his family, but also with every living creature on the earth. This covenant assures that the devastating floodwaters will never again cover the whole earth to destroy all living beings. The sign of the rainbow. God chooses the rainbow as a visible symbol of his covenant. This colorful natural phenomenon holds a significant meaning in this context. Whenever a rainbow appears, it serves as a reminder of God's promise and his enduring love for creation. It stands as a symbol of hope and serves as a reassurance that God keeps his word. The extent of the covenant. God's covenant extends to all flesh, including both humans and animals. This demonstrates the care and concern that God has for his entire creation. It reveals his desire to protect and preserve life, and his intention to maintain a harmonious relationship between humanity and the rest of his creation. Lessons for humanity. This verse teaches us important lessons about God's character and his relationship with humanity. It highlights his faithfulness, mercy, and commitment to his promises. It reminds us that God is a covenant-keeping God, who can be relied upon to fulfill what he has spoken. It also encourages us to trust in God's faithfulness and to have confidence in his protection and provision. Application to our lives. As believers, Genesis chapter 9 verse 15 reminds us of God's enduring faithfulness and the reliability of his promises. It encourages us to trust in his provision, protection, and guidance. Just as God remembered his covenant with Noah and his descendants, we can be assured that God remembers his promises to us and will be faithful in every aspect of our lives. In summary, Genesis chapter 9 verse 15 reveals God's commitment to remembering his covenant with all living creatures. The verse emphasizes God's faithfulness, provides the rainbow as a sign of the covenant, and highlights the extent of God's care for His creation. As we reflect on this verse, we are reminded of God's character, His promises, and the hope we have in His faithfulness. Genesis chapter 9 verse 16. And the bow shall be in the cloud, and I will look upon it, that I may remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is upon the earth. This verse is part of the narrative of Noah and the great flood. After the floodwaters receded and Noah and his family exited the ark, God made a covenant with Noah, promising never to destroy all flesh on the earth by a flood again. The rainbow served as a sign and a reminder of this covenant. Let's explore the significance of Genesis chapter 9 verse 16 and the broader context of this passage. God's covenant. In Genesis chapter 9 verses 8 to 17, God establishes a covenant with Noah, his descendants, and all living creatures. This covenant is an agreement or a promise between God and humanity. It demonstrates God's faithfulness and love, ensuring the continuation of life on earth. The sign of the rainbow. God designates the rainbow as a sign of the covenant. Whenever a rainbow appears in the clouds, it is a reminder to God and to all living creatures of His promise to preserve life and never again bring a worldwide flood. The rainbow serves as a symbol of hope and God's mercy. Remembering the covenant. In Genesis chapter 9 verse 16, God says that He will look upon the rainbow to remember the everlasting covenant. It does not imply that God would forget the covenant without the reminder of the rainbow, but serves as a way for humanity to understand God's faithfulness and remember His promise. Universal covenant. The covenant made with Noah is not limited to Noah and his family, but extends to all living creatures on the earth. God's promise to preserve life encompasses all creation. It emphasizes God's care for all living beings and His desire for their well-being. Everlasting covenant. The covenant made with Noah is described as everlasting. It signifies that God's promise is enduring and will remain in effect for all time. God's faithfulness to His covenant is unchanging, and His promises are reliable. Overall, Genesis chapter 9 verse 16 highlights God's faithfulness and the establishment of a covenant with humanity and all living creatures. The rainbow serves as a constant reminder of God's promise to preserve life and His commitment to His creation. Genesis chapter 9 verse 17. And God said unto Noah, This is the token of the covenant which I have established between me and all flesh that is upon the earth. Genesis chapter 9 verse 17 occurs after the great flood, when Noah and his family, along with the animals in the ark, survived and emerged onto dry land. This verse marks the conclusion of the account of the flood and introduces the concept of the covenant between God and humanity. Context. Prior to verse 17, God had instructed Noah to build an ark and gather 2 of every living creature, as well as his family, to be saved from the impending flood. After the floodwaters subsided and Noah and his family left the ark, Noah built an altar and offered sacrifices to God. God then made a promise, or covenant, with Noah and all living beings. The token of the covenant. In verse 17, God informs Noah that He has established a token of the covenant. The word token here refers to a sign or symbol. This token would serve as a reminder or evidence of the covenant between God and every living creature on earth. The covenant. The covenant mentioned in this verse refers to the agreement that God made with Noah and all living beings on earth. This covenant is also known as the Noahic covenant. It was a unilateral covenant, meaning it was initiated and upheld solely by God without any conditions or requirements for Noah or humanity to fulfill. All flesh. God specifies that the covenant is established between Him and all flesh that is upon the earth. This encompasses not only humans but also every living creature. It demonstrates the all-encompassing nature of God's covenant and His concern for the entire creation. Significance. The covenant serves as a promise from God that He would never again destroy the earth with a flood. In the following verses, God describes the sign of this covenant, which is the rainbow. Whenever a rainbow appears in the sky, it serves as a reminder of God's faithfulness to His covenant and His promise to preserve the earth. Genesis chapter 9 verse 17 is significant as it marks the establishment of the covenant between God and humanity after the flood. It showcases God's faithfulness, mercy, and commitment to His creation. The rainbow, which serves as the sign of this covenant, continues to be a beautiful reminder of God's enduring promise to this day. Genesis chapter 9 verse 18. And the sons of Noah, that went forth of the ark, were Shem, and Ham, and Japheth, and Ham is the father of Canaan. Context and background. Genesis chapter 9 verse 18 comes immediately after the account of the great flood, where Noah and his family were spared, along with a selection of animals, on the ark. After the floodwaters receded, Noah and his family exited the ark and began to repopulate the earth. The sons of Noah. In this verse, we are introduced to the three sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. These three sons played a significant role in the post-flood world as they became the ancestors of all the nations and peoples of the earth. The verse specifically mentions Ham as the father of Canaan. Ham's descendants. The mention of Ham as the father of Canaan is significant because it sets the stage for future events. The descendants of Canaan, known as the Canaanites, would eventually occupy the land of Canaan, which was promised to Abraham and his descendants, the Israelites. The interactions and conflicts between the Israelites and the Canaanites would have far-reaching implications throughout biblical history. Lessons and applications. Family. The verse emphasizes the importance of family and lineage. It highlights the continuation of humanity through the sons of Noah, demonstrating the fulfillment of God's command to be fruitful and multiply. Genesis chapter 9 verse 1. It reminds us of the significance of our own family connections and the responsibilities that come with them. Diversity. The three sons of Noah represent the diversity of humanity. Through their descendants, the entire spectrum of ethnicities and nations emerged. This verse reminds us of the beauty and richness of diversity in the world and encourages us to appreciate and value different cultures and peoples. God's faithfulness. Despite the judgment of the flood, God remained faithful to His promise to preserve humanity through Noah and his family. This verse reminds us of God's faithfulness in keeping His promises, even in the face of human sin and brokenness. It points forward to God's ultimate faithfulness in sending Jesus Christ to redeem humanity from sin. Future implications. The mention of Ham as the father of Canaan foreshadows future events, particularly the Israelites' possession of the Promised Land and their interactions with the Canaanites. It highlights the providential working of God in human history and the fulfillment of His plans and purposes. Overall, Genesis chapter 9 verse 18 serves as a bridge between the account of the flood and the subsequent events that unfold in the biblical narrative. It provides us with important historical and genealogical information while setting the stage for future events and lessons we can learn from. Genesis chapter 9 verse 19. And these are the three sons of Noah, and of them was the whole earth overspread. This verse is part of the narrative following the account of the great flood in the book of Genesis. After the floodwaters receded, Noah, his wife, his three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives emerged from the ark, which had become their refuge during the cataclysmic event. Genesis chapter 9 verse 19 serves as a summary statement, highlighting the descendants of Noah and their role in repopulating the earth. The verse signifies the fulfillment of God's command to Noah and his sons to be fruitful, and multiply, and replenish the earth. Genesis chapter 9 verse 1. The subsequent verses in Genesis chapter 9 describe the blessings and responsibilities that God assigns to Noah and his sons. Noah receives a divine covenant, symbolized by the rainbow, which promises that the earth will never be destroyed by a flood again. Genesis chapter 9 verses 8 to 17. Additionally, God establishes a code of conduct regarding the sanctity of human life, forbidding murder and prescribing punishment for those who shed the blood of another human being. Genesis chapter 9 verses 5 to 7. Genesis chapter 9 verse 19 serves as a transitional verse, marking the conclusion of the story of the flood and introducing the genealogical records that follow. These genealogies trace the lineages of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and ultimately lead to the emergence of various nations and peoples. The verse also highlights the unity of humanity, as the three sons of Noah became the ancestors of all the different nations and cultures that inhabit the earth. This emphasizes the common origin and shared ancestry of all human beings. Overall, Genesis chapter 9 verse 19 provides a bridge between the account of the flood and the subsequent narrative of the post-flood world, illustrating the fulfillment of God's command to Noah and his sons to multiply and repopulate the earth. It highlights the unity and common ancestry of humanity, while also setting the stage for the unfolding stories and events that follow in the biblical narrative. Genesis chapter 9 verse 20. And Noah began to be an husbandman, and he planted a vineyard. This verse comes immediately after the account of Noah and his family exiting the ark following the great flood. Let's explore the context and significance of this verse. Historical context. Genesis chapter 9 records the aftermath of the flood, where Noah, his wife, his three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives were the only survivors. God made a covenant with Noah, promising never to destroy all life on earth by a flood again. After this covenant, Noah and his family began to repopulate the earth. Noah as a husbandman. Genesis chapter 9 verse 20 states that Noah began to be a husbandman. This phrase indicates that Noah became a farmer or cultivator of the land. It highlights the fact that Noah turned his attention to the task of working the soil and growing crops. As one of the few remaining inhabitants of the earth, Noah had to take up the responsibility of providing sustenance for himself and his family. Planting a vineyard. The verse continues, stating that Noah planted a vineyard. A vineyard is an area of land specifically cultivated for growing grapes, which are used for making wine. Noah's decision to plant a vineyard suggests a desire to engage in agriculture beyond mere subsistence farming. He chose to invest time and effort into cultivating a crop that could yield grapes for making wine. Symbolism and lessons. While this verse may seem straightforward, it holds symbolic and moral significance that can be explored. Diligence and stewardship. Noah's decision to become a husbandman reflects his diligence and sense of responsibility. It teaches us the value of hard work, stewardship of the earth's resources, and the need to provide for our families. Moderation and the misuse of blessings. Later passages in the Bible highlight the potential dangers associated with alcohol misuse. While Genesis chapter 9 verse 20 doesn't explicitly mention the outcome of Noah's vineyard, subsequent events involving Noah and his consumption of wine caution against the abuse of blessings and the importance of moderation. Continuation of life after the flood. Noah's engagement in farming and cultivation signifies the continuation of life and the rebuilding of society after the devastating flood. It demonstrates humanity's ability to recover, adapt, and thrive in the face of adversity. The wider context of the story. It's worth noting that the story of Noah and his vineyard serves as a bridge between the account of the flood and the subsequent events that unfold involving Noah's drunkenness, Genesis chapter 9 verse 21, and its consequences for his family. This larger narrative emphasizes the fallibility of humanity and the need for redemption and grace. In summary, Genesis chapter 9 verse 20 marks a significant moment in Noah's life as he transitions from a survivor of the flood to a husbandman and cultivator of the land. This verse reminds us of the importance of diligence, stewardship, and the responsible use of blessings. It also highlights the resilience of humanity in the face of adversity, as Noah begins the process of rebuilding and sustaining life on earth. Genesis chapter 9 verse 21. And he drank of the wine, and was drunken, and he was uncovered within his tent. This verse is part of the account of Noah and his sons after the flood. It provides a brief description of Noah's actions and the consequences that followed. To understand the significance of this verse, it's essential to examine the broader context and explore its implications. In Genesis chapter 9, we find Noah and his family after the flood, when God had commanded him to leave the ark and repopulate the earth. In verses 20 to 21, it is stated that Noah, who was a husbandman, planted a vineyard. He then made wine from the grapes and consumed it. The verse tells us that Noah became drunk from the wine he had made. As a result, he was uncovered within his tent. The meaning of uncovered in this context suggests that Noah's nakedness was exposed. This incident reveals a moment of weakness and vulnerability in the life of a man who had previously found favor with God and been declared righteous. Genesis chapter 6 verse 9. Noah's drunkenness and subsequent nakedness are significant because they highlight the imperfections and human frailties of even the most righteous individuals. It serves as a reminder that no person, regardless of their spiritual standing, is immune to sin or susceptible to moral failings. Moreover, this incident demonstrates that even after experiencing God's grace and witnessing His divine judgment through the flood, Noah was not exempt from the consequences of his actions. Though Noah had been chosen by God to survive the flood and start a new chapter for humanity, this event showcases the reality of human fallibility and the need for ongoing repentance and reliance on God's mercy. It is worth noting that Genesis chapter 9 verse 21 is not primarily a verse about drunkenness or the consumption of alcohol itself. Instead, it emphasizes the human condition and the need for accountability, humility, and the recognition of our own weaknesses. In summary, Genesis chapter 9 verse 21 reminds us that even the most righteous individuals can stumble and fall. It underscores the universal human condition, highlighting the need for humility and continual reliance on God's grace and forgiveness. This verse serves as a cautionary tale, prompting us to remain vigilant and to seek God's guidance in all areas of our lives. Genesis chapter 9 verse 22. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and told his two brethren without. Context: Genesis chapter 9 is a chapter that follows the story of Noah and the flood. After the floodwaters receded, Noah and his family left the ark and began to repopulate the earth. In verse 20, we find Noah as a husbandman who planted a vineyard. Verse 21 tells us that he drank of the wine he produced and became drunk in his tent. Ham's act. Genesis chapter 9 verse 22 focuses on Ham, one of Noah's sons. Ham entered his father's tent and saw his father's nakedness. The phrase, saw the nakedness of his father, is often interpreted to imply a dishonorable or disrespectful act towards Noah. Telling his brethren, Ham then went and told his two brothers, Shem and Japheth, about what he had seen. The act of telling his brothers has been regarded as a breach of respect and honor towards his father. Consequences. In the subsequent verses, Noah wakes up and learns about what Ham had done. In Genesis chapter 9 verses 24 to 27, Noah pronounces a curse upon Ham's son, Canaan, and blesses Shem and Japheth. This curse on Canaan is significant because it sets the stage for the future conflicts between the descendants of Canaan and the descendants of Shem. Interpretations and lessons. The precise nature of Ham's offense is not explicitly mentioned in the text, leading to different interpretations among biblical scholars. Some suggest that seeing his father's nakedness might imply a sexual sin or an act of disrespect. However, it is important to note that the text does not provide detailed information. From this account, we can draw a few lessons. Respect for parents. Ham's actions highlight the importance of honoring and respecting our parents, even in their moments of weakness or vulnerability. Ham's failure to show respect to his father serves as a cautionary tale for us to treat our parents with honor and dignity. Discretion and confidentiality. Ham's mistake was not only seeing his father's nakedness but also spreading the information to his brothers. This teaches us the importance of discretion and confidentiality. We should be careful not to spread or gossip about sensitive or private matters, especially concerning our family members. Consequences of actions. Noah's response to Ham's actions demonstrates that our actions have consequences. Ham's disrespectful behavior resulted in a curse upon his own son. This reminds us that our actions can impact not only ourselves but also future generations. It's important to approach this passage with humility and recognize that some aspects remain open to interpretation. However, the key lessons of respect, discretion, and understanding the consequences of our actions are clear takeaways from Genesis chapter 9 verse 22. Genesis chapter 9 verse 23. And Shem and Japheth took a garment, and laid it upon both their shoulders, and went backward, and covered the nakedness of their father, and their faces were backward, and they saw not their father's nakedness. Context: Genesis chapter 9 verse 23 is part of the account of Noah and his sons, immediately following the incident where Noah became drunk and lay uncovered in his tent. Ham, one of Noah's sons, saw his father's nakedness and told his brothers about it. Shem and Japheth, the other two sons, responded by covering their father's nakedness without looking at him. Respect for authority. This verse illustrates the importance of respect and honor for parents or authority figures. Shem and Japheth demonstrated honor and reverence toward their father by taking immediate action to cover his nakedness. Their actions serve as an example of how we should respond to situations where our authority figures are vulnerable or in need. Modesty and discretion. Shem and Japheth's decision to cover their father's nakedness without looking at him also teaches us about modesty and discretion. They turned their faces backwards so as not to see their father's nakedness, preserving his dignity and maintaining their own purity. This demonstrates the importance of protecting others' privacy and guarding our own hearts and minds. Selflessness and unity. Shem and Japheth worked together to cover their father's nakedness. Their joint effort shows selflessness and unity within the family. They put their father's well-being above their own, setting an example of love and care for one another. This passage encourages us to prioritize the needs of others and work together harmoniously within our families and communities. Symbolic significance. Some biblical scholars interpret this incident allegorically, seeing Noah's uncovered nakedness as representing shame or sin. In this view, Shem and Japheth's action of covering their father's nakedness represents the covering and forgiveness of sin. It serves as a foreshadowing of Christ's redemptive work on the cross, where he covers our sins and brings us into a restored relationship with God. Personal application. As we reflect on this verse, we can ask ourselves how we respond to vulnerable situations involving our parents or authority figures. Do we demonstrate respect and honor, or do we exploit their weaknesses? Additionally, we can examine our attitudes toward modesty, privacy, and unity within our families and communities. This passage invites us to embody selflessness, unity, and a heart of forgiveness. Remember, understanding any verse in the Bible should be done within the broader context of the entire passage, book, and the overall message of the Scriptures. Genesis chapter 9 verse 24. And Noah awoke from his wine, and knew what his younger son had done unto him. Context. Genesis chapter 9 is a chapter that describes events after the Great Flood, when Noah and his family were the only survivors. God made a covenant with Noah and his descendants, promising never to destroy the earth by a flood again. Genesis chapter 9 verses 20 to 23 recounts an incident where Noah planted a vineyard, got drunk from the wine he produced, and was uncovered within his tent. Noah's drunkenness. The verse starts by mentioning that Noah awoke from his wine. It indicates that Noah had become intoxicated from the wine he had consumed. Drunkenness is portrayed negatively in the Bible as it impairs judgment and self-control. Noah, who had previously found favor with God, experienced a lapse in his judgment and behavior. His younger son's action. The verse mentions that Noah knew what his younger son had done unto him. While the Bible does not explicitly state what the younger son did, there are different interpretations and theories among scholars. The identity of the younger son is debated, with various opinions suggesting that it could be Ham, Shem, or Japheth. Ham is often considered the most likely candidate based on the following verses, Genesis chapter 9 verses 25 to 27. Consequences and interpretations. Following this incident, Noah pronounced curses and blessings upon his sons. Genesis chapter 9 verses 25 to 27 describes the consequences for Ham's actions. It is believed that Ham disrespected or dishonored Noah in some way, possibly by looking at his father's nakedness or by mocking him. As a result, Noah cursed Canaan, one of Ham's sons, and blessed Shem and Japheth. Lessons to learn. The dangers of excessive drinking. Noah's drunkenness serves as a cautionary tale about the potential consequences of excessive drinking. It reminds us to exercise self-control and to be mindful of the influence of alcohol. Respect for authority and parental honor. This incident highlights the importance of respecting authority figures and honoring one's parents. Ham's disrespectful action resulted in consequences for his descendants. God's faithfulness despite human shortcomings. Even though Noah faltered, God remained faithful to his covenant and did not revoke it. This demonstrates God's mercy and grace despite human imperfections. Application. As we reflect on Genesis chapter 9 verse 24, we can learn to exercise self-control, respect authority, and honor our parents. We should also be mindful of the consequences our actions may have on future generations. It is a reminder that, even when we fail, God's grace is available to us, and He remains faithful to His promises. Remember to read the surrounding verses and consult additional commentaries or study resources to gain a more comprehensive understanding of the passage. Genesis chapter 9 verse 25. And he said, Cursed be Canaan. A servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren. Context. Genesis chapter 9 verse 25 is part of the narrative of Noah and his sons after the flood. Following the flood, Noah planted a vineyard, got drunk, and lay uncovered in his tent. Ham, one of Noah's sons, saw his father's nakedness and told his two brothers, Shem and Japheth. Shem and Japheth took a garment and walked backward to cover their father, showing respect for him. When Noah awoke, he learned what Ham had done and pronounced a curse upon Ham's son Canaan. Understanding the curse, the specific words of the curse are directed towards Canaan, the son of Ham. The curse states that Canaan would be a servant of servants to his brethren. This curse seems to indicate a future subservient role or status for the Canaanite people. Symbolic meaning. The curse on Canaan can be seen as a prophecy or foreshadowing of the future interactions between the Israelites and the Canaanites. When the Israelites later entered the land of Canaan, they encountered various Canaanite tribes and kingdoms that opposed them. The fulfillment of this curse is evident in the subsequent conquest of Canaan by the Israelites under Joshua. Interpretation challenges. The curse on Canaan has been a subject of debate among scholars and theologians. Some argue that the curse was related to Ham's disrespectful attitude towards his father Noah, while others suggest that it might have been related to the Canaanite practices of idolatry and immorality. However, the exact reason for the curse is not explicitly stated in the text, and it is important to approach this passage with caution and sensitivity. Application for today. As with any passage in the Bible, it is essential to consider the broader biblical narrative and teachings when interpreting and applying this verse. While the specific curse on Canaan was fulfilled in the historical context of the Israelites' conquest of Canaan, it is crucial to recognize that the Bible also emphasizes God's love, forgiveness, and redemption for all people. Overall, Genesis chapter 9 verse 25 provides insight into the historical context of the Israelites and their relationship with the Canaanite people. However, it is important to approach this verse with care and to study the broader themes of the Bible to fully understand God's overarching plan of redemption and grace for all humanity. Genesis chapter 9 verse 26. And he said, Blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. This verse is part of the narrative following the account of Noah and the flood. After the floodwaters receded, Noah and his family emerged from the ark. In this particular verse, Noah, who had planted a vineyard, became drunk from the wine he had made and lay uncovered in his tent. Ham, one of Noah's sons, saw his father's nakedness and told his two brothers, Shem and Japheth, about it. However, Shem and Japheth took a garment and covered their father's nakedness without looking at him. Upon waking up and realizing what had happened, Noah cursed Canaan, the son of Ham, while blessing Shem. This verse specifically expresses Noah's blessing towards the Lord God of Shem and prophesies that Canaan would be Shem's servant. The significance of this verse lies in the broader context of biblical genealogy and the future of the descendants of Noah's sons. Shem was one of Noah's 3 sons, and from Shem's lineage, the Israelites, who are the chosen people of God, descended. The blessing directed towards the Lord God of Shem is an acknowledgement of the special relationship between God and Shem's descendants. On the other hand, the mention of Canaan being Shem's servant has been interpreted in various ways. Canaan was the 4th son of Ham and traditionally associated with the Canaanites, a people inhabiting the land of Canaan. Some scholars believe that the mention of Canaan as a servant signifies the future subjugation of the Canaanite people by the Israelites. This prophecy was fulfilled when the Israelites, under Joshua's leadership, entered the Promised Land and conquered Canaan. It's important to note that the Bible should be interpreted in its historical and cultural context. While the language used in this verse may seem to imply the servitude of the Canaanites, it is crucial to approach such passages with sensitivity and recognize that any form of servitude or oppression is contrary to the principles of love, justice, and equality taught throughout the Bible. In summary, Genesis chapter 9 verse 26 highlights Noah's blessing towards the Lord God of Shem and the prophecy of Canaan's servitude. It establishes a connection between God and the descendants of Shem, and it carries implications for the future relationship between the Israelites and the Canaanite people. Genesis chapter 9 verse 27. God shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. This verse is part of a larger narrative found in the book of Genesis, specifically in the context of the story of Noah and his sons. After the flood that destroyed all life on earth, Noah and his family were the only survivors. Following their exit from the ark, God made a covenant with Noah, which included several promises and instructions. In Genesis chapter 9 verse 27, we encounter a specific prophecy related to Noah's sons. The verse mentions Japheth, Shem, and Canaan. Japheth and Shem were 2 of Noah's sons, while Canaan was the son of Ham, another one of Noah's sons. The prophecy declares that God will enlarge Japheth. The term, enlarge, in this context suggests an expansion of territory, influence, or blessing for Japheth's descendants. Japheth's descendants are generally understood to represent various nations and peoples who spread across Europe and parts of Asia. Historically, Japheth's descendants have been associated with the Indo-European peoples. The verse further states that Japheth will dwell in the tents of Shem. This phrase is open to interpretation and has been understood in different ways. One possible interpretation is that Japheth would share in the spiritual blessings of Shem's descendants. Shem is regarded as the ancestor of the Semitic peoples, including the Israelites. Thus, the verse may imply that Japheth would participate in the blessings and knowledge of God that Shem's descendants would receive. Lastly, the verse mentions that Canaan will be the servant of Japheth. Canaan, the son of Ham, is believed to be the ancestor of the Canaanite people who occupied the land of Canaan, which later became the Promised Land for the Israelites. This verse suggests that the Canaanites would be subjugated and become servants or subjects to the descendants of Japheth. It is important to note that this verse, like other prophecies in the Bible, has been subject to various interpretations and debates among scholars. Some interpret this prophecy as having historical and geopolitical implications, while others focus more on the spiritual and symbolic aspects. As with any biblical study, it is beneficial to consider multiple perspectives and consult various commentaries and resources to gain a comprehensive understanding of the verse in question. Genesis chapter 9 verse 28. And Noah lived after the flood 350 years. This verse comes at the end of the account of Noah and the flood, which is described in Genesis 6-9. After the floodwaters receded, Noah and his family, along with all the animals in the ark, emerged onto dry land. This verse provides a timeline of Noah's life after the flood. Significance of the time mentioned. According to Genesis chapter 9 verse 28, Noah lived for an additional 350 years after the flood. This lifespan is noteworthy because it demonstrates God's faithfulness in preserving Noah and his descendants despite the cataclysmic judgment of the flood. It also highlights the long-term impact and influence Noah had on subsequent generations. God's promise and covenant. Before the flood, God found Noah righteous and instructed him to build the ark. God made a covenant with Noah, promising to save him and his family and preserve the animal species through the flood. Genesis chapter 6 verse 18. After the flood, God renewed his covenant with Noah and his descendants, symbolized by the rainbow. Genesis chapter 9 verses 9 to 17. The extended lifespan of Noah after the flood is a testament to God's faithfulness in fulfilling his promises. Noah's faith and obedience. Throughout the narrative, Noah is portrayed as a righteous and obedient servant of God. He followed God's instructions meticulously in constructing the ark and gathering the animals. Despite the length of time it took to build the ark, 120 years according to Genesis chapter 6 verse 3, Noah remained faithful and obedient to God's command. His obedience and trust in God's word played a crucial role in the preservation of humanity and the animal kingdom. Foreshadowing of future events. The post-flood period marked the beginning of a new era for humanity. Noah's longevity after the flood provided an opportunity for him to pass on his knowledge and faith in God to his descendants. Additionally, the narrative sets the stage for subsequent events and the development of humanity, leading to the stories of Abraham, Moses, and ultimately, the nation of Israel. Lessons for believers today. The account of Noah and the flood carries several important lessons for believers today. It highlights the significance of faith and obedience to God's commands, even in the face of adversity or societal opposition. Noah's example encourages us to trust in God's promises and remain faithful to His word. It also reminds us of the consequences of sin and the importance of repentance and righteousness. In summary, Genesis chapter 9 verse 28 provides a brief statement regarding Noah's life after the flood, underscoring God's faithfulness, Noah's obedience, and the beginning of a new era for humanity. By studying this verse in the broader context of the flood narrative, we gain insights into God's character, His covenantal promises, and the enduring lessons we can apply to our own lives as believers. Genesis chapter 9 verse 29. And all the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. Context. Genesis chapter 9 verse 29 marks the conclusion of the account of Noah and his life after the flood. This verse provides us with information about Noah's lifespan and his eventual death. The longevity of Noah. A. Noah's age. According to Genesis chapter 9 verse 29, Noah lived for 950 years. This remarkable lifespan is one of the longest recorded in the Bible. B. Comparison with previous generations. Before the flood, several individuals mentioned in Genesis lived much longer lives. For instance, Adam lived for 930 years, Genesis chapter 5 verse 5. Methuselah lived for 969 years, Genesis chapter 5 verse 27. And Jared lived for 962 years, Genesis chapter 5 verse 20. However, after the flood, human lifespans began to decrease significantly. God's faithfulness and grace. Preservation of Noah. Throughout the account of the flood, we see God's faithfulness to Noah. God chose Noah and his family to be preserved from the destruction of the flood because Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Genesis chapter 6 verse 8. Noah's life serves as a reminder of God's faithfulness in keeping His promises and protecting His chosen ones. Fulfillment of God's plan. Despite the sinful state of humanity that led to the flood, God's plan for redemption continued through Noah's family. Noah's obedience in building the ark and his faithfulness to God's instructions played a vital role in preserving the human race. Mortality and the legacy of Noah. Death as a consequence of sin. Noah's death, like every human's death, serves as a reminder of the consequences of sin. Death entered the world due to Adam and Eve's disobedience. Genesis chapter 2 verse 17, Romans chapter 5 verse 12. Noah's lifespan was relatively long compared to later generations, but eventually, he experienced physical death as a result of sin's presence in the world. A lasting legacy. Although Noah died, his life left a lasting impact. His righteousness, obedience, and faithfulness are remembered throughout history. Noah's legacy reminds us of the importance of walking with God, trusting in His faithfulness, and being obedient to His commands. Overall, Genesis chapter 9 verse 29 provides a glimpse into the life of Noah, emphasizing God's faithfulness and grace in preserving him through the flood and his eventual death as a consequence of sin. It also reminds us of the importance of living a life pleasing to God and leaving behind a lasting legacy of faithfulness.